What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. This is on the back of a very, very busy streaming week that we've had here at Panasonic Lumix. If you were some of the people that joined us during the Lumix Expo that we had the last couple days, hosted here in the US, I want to thank you for joining us. If you don't know what that is, it was our kind of first expo that we ran to kind of continue this community platform that we've built here on YouTube and just try to bring more people into it in a different kind of atmosphere. So this was our first shot at it. If you are interested in hearing about, as my mouse wants to not cooperate with me, if you guys are interested in hearing about events like that, updates of when we're going to be doing more of these kinds of events, get yourself registered on the Lumix email address or the Lumix email list. I just dropped a link in the chat there. That's our landing page for the S-Series cameras all the way down on the bottom. You can get yourself on the emails. And this way you can get heads up as to when we do stuff like that. So if this is your first time joining us, you can tell it's been a couple of days worth of streams. If this is your first time joining us for one of these Lumix live streams, these are our weekly events where we cover topics everywhere from ultra technical deep dives into cameras like we did last week with Matt Frazier, all the way to more inspirational content with filmmakers, photographers, videographers, the community members, to share their personal experiences with the cameras and answer questions that y'all might have. For this week, though, we actually went back into some of the archives of the questions and the requests that all of you have made to the Lumix Live at us.panasonic email for things that either you want more clarity on, things that we may have missed in the past, and then also some areas that we just haven't actually really maybe covered all that much about. For instance, I've got an FZ2500 here, one of our compact bridge cameras, that we're going to be talking a little bit about as well. You know, some of its features, some of the cool things that may actually have been overlooked on that camera, because we've focused very heavily on the S-Series over the last year. But now it's about time to get back to talking about the entire system across the board, the point and shoot series, the G series, the S series, and just kind of really hopefully find that everyone gets nice and happy with, you know, the coverage that we're giving. We're also going to be talking about some of the updates, the firmware updates that we provided over the last couple of weeks. We've had the update come out for the BGH1, which added ProRes RAW, or RAW out over HDMI recording on that camera, as well as the IP streaming. We had the BRAW update for the S1H that just came out yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. And we have a couple of other firmware updates coming for the S1, the S5, the S1R next week. We're not going to go into too much detail about that. If you want to check it out during the replay of this, I'll put a card up here that points out where that video is, because that was a deep conversation with Matt Frazier and myself the other day. Let's see, what else do we have on the docket for today? We're going to be addressing some of the questions that y'all have had about different capabilities with different lenses when you have them attached on our cameras. Specifically, I'm going to address the linear focus that I know some people have been asking us about. Let's see, what kind of some comments in the chat here. You feel outdated because you're still using a G85. Definitely don't. That's a solid little camera to be to tool around with and still produce some awesome image quality out of it. What else? We're going to be talking about some of the controls that you can use with the cameras that are constantly being asked about how to lock the control dials on the camera. So if you're out in the field, you're not going to be bumping things. Also going to touch on some topics about the Sync app. And then I wanted to take a few minutes and actually walk through some of the things that you're going to notice if you're a Lightroom photo editor or a Capture One photo editor. So some of the differences between the two platforms. I've got both of them loaded up on the screen here. And then depending on if time allows, we'll also be looking at BRAW in Premiere. Since I don't have Resolve on this computer that I run the streaming off of, and you know, I lost the little key thing that lets you actually have access to it on my MacBook. I'm going to show you what you can do in Premiere with it and how it kind of functions, at least with the newest current versions. So aside from that, if you guys have questions for me throughout this session, we're not limited to just the topics that I mentioned over there. If you guys have specific topics that you want to ask questions about or something you want me to take a little bit of a dive down, drop it in the chat using @LumixCameras, and I'll be able to get in there and kind of answer what I can. We're flying a little solo today, I believe, as far as the chat goes, so it's just me in the chat. So bear with me a little bit on that. And I think that's pretty good. So before we get into the presentation or the actual discussions about this, I want to remind everybody that we have the Lumix Pro Services available for both the Red and the Platinum level. These are service platforms that are designed for photographers, videographers, content creators, whatever your discipline is. If you own a Lumix camera, you want to check this platform out. The Lumix Red Tier is our free tier that everybody's eligible for, so you definitely want to go take a look at that. It lets you get your 3-year extended warranty, which is included with the purchase of Lumix cameras. You have access to the service system online. You get visibility for everything going on, and then you also get notifications of exclusive events and opportunities and promotions that come up over time. If you're a working professional or you just are someone who actually wants to have that higher level of service, we also have the Red Tier available for LPS. The LPS the Platinum series. The Platinum series of our service is it's a paid level service. Gets you 20% off of out of warranty repairs. So that's if you drop or break your camera and it's got to be repaired and it's not something that would be a warranty repair. You're getting a discount on that. You're getting much faster turnaround times. So 2-day repairs with next day shipping both way for free. You get an exclusive welcome kit that has a really cool little metal card. And you're also getting a Peak Design customized slide light strap for your camera, which actually, I was actually prepared for once today, so I'll actually show this on camera. And you also get your annual sensor cleanings, EVF cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all that kind of cool stuff, as well as a direct customer line. So if you have questions, you can reach out directly to a team member instead of going through the chat method and some of the other service systems that we have at Panasonic here. So just to let you guys see, this is the strap that you get with the LPS Platinum membership. So it's the slide light strap from Peak Design that's got the Lumix Pro embroidered on it here. Actually, a nice little patch added to it. Matches the color scheme, and we all know that one of the first things you do when you pick up a camera is you get another strap. So why not get a Peak Design strap that's got, a nice little personalization touch on it there. So let's see. Do we have any questions so far for this? I see a couple in here. Let me actually pop this chat out so that it's a little bit easier for me to read. There we go. That's better. That's why I'm looking a little bit closer to camera. I run my YouTube channel on a G9 and G7. Awesome. Love hearing that kind of stuff. And yeah, backing up that point, definitely don't feel outdated on a G85. It's an awesome little camera. Let's see here. Feature that sold you on the G9 was the 0.83 EVF. Yeah, it's a really nice solid EVF, highish resolution, and it's awesome. Cody's asking, any update on the rest of the 1.8 primes? Really looking forward to the 24. I'm really looking forward to the 24 and 35. But unfortunately, I don't have any updates on when those lenses are coming. We did say at the announcement of those particular lenses that they will be coming soon. We didn't really give a date on them, but definitely stay connected, get on the email lists. Even if you just do the LPS Red level, get yourself registered. You'll hear about it there first. And then obviously, once things come out, we'll always talk about them here. Let's see here. That's a very clever way of asking that question, Warwarp. Unfortunately, I have no information about anything to do with any future cameras or anything like that. We won't comment on them. I appreciate every single week the questions that get asked about future cameras. So unfortunately, I just don't have any information on them. So let's see here. What else we got? Redbit's asking, I forgot to ask last time, will the S1 new firmware let us set -1 as noise reduction when recording vlog or output Cinema 4K via HDMI like the S1H? So the S1 does not need to do -1 noise reduction as compared to the S1H. There are differences between some of the image quality that you'll see there. -1 on the S1H was designed specifically as the feedback from S1H users. If you're an S1 user, you'll probably see that leaving Vlog for noise reduction, leaving it at 0, it's going to be a very different setup, because what you have to remember too is that the S1H has a lot a lot bigger codecs, a lot, has all inch things like that. Where the S1 doesn't, so it doesn't need the same treatment that the S1H did as far as Vlog goes for some of the users that were having some concerns there. Brix is asking about Live View Composites. I will actually talk about Live View Composites a little bit. Solid Mind Productions, will Pana add phase to AF? I have no information on AF other than where we work with the DFD system. Just a reminder, guys, if you have questions, tag @Lumix Cameras before it, like Redbit did. This way it pops up on here and I can tell that it's a question, not a conversation. Question for the FZ1000 Mark II. What is the best f-stop for producing the sharpest landscape photos? That's actually something I'm going to get to in a moment once I finish these questions here. I'm going to be using the FZ2500 though, just as the demo camera, because I don't have a 1000 Mark II here. But the logic's going to be the same between them. Have an S5, which is amazing. Constantly get glitches in the footage with ProRes. I've tried multiple cables. And this is from Guitar Moves. I'm not sure. I would say I don't have any update on any of that stuff. Just know that it is something that has been brought up to our attention, and we are taking a look at it. We do have a firmware coming out very soon. I think April 6th for the S5. So what I would recommend is once that update comes out, then take a look at it and, obviously feedback through the official channels. If you guys have official issues or concerns, get those over to the service department in Panasonic. Social media is great. I monitor a lot of the conversations that go on Facebook and Instagram and obviously here on YouTube. But if it never gets into our service team, it's hard to actually track that stuff. So if you're ever having issues, definitely get it into the service department. So at least there's a record of what you guys have going on. Warwarp, would there potentially be a kit set for the BGH1? It'd be nice to have some things ready out of the box. I don't want to say never or no. I don't think the box camera or BGH1 would have a kit out of the box, but we're always open to suggestions. So if you have a suggested kit that you are thinking of, drop it in the chat. We can always pass that kind of conversation on to our team. Martin's asking, is it possible to get BGH1 SDI output might get 4K? No, the SDI output on the BGH1 is 3G SDI, specifically for the purpose that traditional broadcast that's highly adopting the BGH1 is typically still on 3G SDI as the standard. 6G and 12G still are not built into the typical platforms, so it wouldn't make sense to have it there, because a single out to take advantage of 4K, you would actually take up four ports on your switcher. So yeah, it's 3G. It's only going to be 1080, 60p, 422 10-bit. Are you guys talking to Capture One tether support? And isn't there an update coming up for webcam software used? Because I have to keep using 2 programs. I'm actually going to talk about Capture One software in a little bit. But one of the challenges with the Capture One software is that, obviously we always push. I would love to have Capture One support for tethering with the S-series cameras and even some of my G-series cameras. But one of the biggest ways to get this done, aside from our conversations and push to try to get it into integrated into Capture One is if you guys let Capture One know that these are cameras you want supported. The more information you let them know to say, hey, we want this in our software, the more likely it is to happen. So together as a community, we can try to make it happen. I'll say try to make it happen because obviously I'm not 100% in engineering or anything like that, so I don't know if there are any issues there. Luckshot, S1H firmware update had a fix for SD card or for files. Could you explain that in detail? Yes, I can. Not a lot of detail because I don't know 100% about it, but I'll touch on it a little bit. Thanks. I know the S1H, but how about the S1 HDMI output? Isn't -1 noise reduction useful? There shouldn't be a difference when it comes to HDMI out with it because the image is still being processed in camera, so you're just getting the bigger bit depth out of it. So the core of it is that -1 on the S1H is closer to 0 on the S1 because of the inherent capability differences between the cameras. So it improved the S1H in some respects, but that's why 0 is still left as 0 on that camera. -1 is an additional shift for those that prefer that. Okay, keep the questions coming. I'm going to come back to a lot of them, and we will get into some of the topics here. Just make sure there's nothing directly related here. Okay, yeah, so as I said, keep the questions coming, keep tag at Lumix Cameras, and I'll be able to see them and address them during the stream. So I think the first one I'm going to talk about here is the FZ series, so with the point-and-shoot cameras. As someone had asked up at the beginning, and I apologize if I don't call out names, my brain's a little shot, I forget names after like 2 minutes. So our bridge cameras, which are obviously with a lot of the people that are here joining us today, we typically have a lot of people that love working with interchangeable lens cameras, the full frame S series, the crop censored micro four thirds series, so like a G100, BGH1, GH5, the normal cameras, G85s. Our bridge cameras are the kind of awesome companion cameras for users that want something that's really easy to use. It still gives you a pretty large set of capabilities that are at the core the important things for image creation, whether you're a photographer or videographer. When you look at the different tiers of the cameras, we have things like a ZS70, a ZS80, ZS100s, 200. We have the FZ80, FZ300, 1000 Mark II, and the 2500. And each of them are great for different levels of users, different purposes that you want to go to. Like the reason I have the FZ2500 here that I wanted to use for this demonstration today is that a lot of us are video creators or hybrid creators at least. You're jumping back and forth between creating beautiful landscapes, taking portraiture, travel photography, but then you also want something that can do really, really high quality video as well. And I know the question before was asking about the FZ1000 Mark II, and a lot of this is going to be very similar to that camera. When you're working with some of these cameras, there's a couple things that you just want to kind of keep in mind that are obviously different for those that work a lot with this equipment, but in some cases it may be very easily overlooked. And one of the points is, your f-stops, your aperture, depth of field control is going to be different on a camera like this than on a camera like this. Full frame 35mm censored camera, you've got in the S series, you've got a 1-inch sensor in a lot of the higher end point and shoots. So while you'll have different depth of field effects, your exposures are typically going to be looking the same. And by looking the same, I mean, you set your ISO at like 100, 200, 400, 800. You set your shutter speed at, what you would normally set it, and you set your aperture. So not really much difference there, right? But for cases like where you're looking specifically to the question like landscape photography with 1-inch censored cameras is actually probably one of the more easy ways to just kind of get out there, create some awesome looking images, and not have to necessarily worry about, do I have to stop my lens all the way down to get the sharpest looking image? This is an area where the depth of field differences between a full frame camera and a crop censored camera actually can work into your favor by using a smaller censored camera. It's the same in the broadcast world too. So say on a 35mm camera, you would be setting your lens to say like f8, f11, f16, to really try to get the most depth of field, or the most, the largest depth of field with the best sharpness, or to have everything in focus. And I use those as quotes because it doesn't actually change the focus. On a full frame camera, you may be looking at f16. On a 1-inch camera, especially like the FZ1000 Mark II or the FZ2500, a lot of times with landscapes, I have the camera set to about f8. Now, at the ultra-wide range on a lot of these cameras that stop down usually by a stop or two, in telephoto, that may be like a third of a stop down or a half a stop down in some cases. So it doesn't have to stop down as much as you would think in a full frame camera or even in a micro four thirds camera, because your depth of field is inherently deeper than a larger censored camera. You're really only stopping down for some of the increased sharpness that happens. And when you go too far stopping down, like the old school thinking of stop down to f22 for the best sharpness and depth of field, I think a lot of people in the chat probably recognize you don't really want to do that, especially these days with how high resolution cameras are, because you start to introduce diffraction into your image. Now, our cameras do have a diffraction compensation mode in them, which knows what the diffraction is going to look like at a certain aperture on a lens. So it tries to compensate some of that. So you get, I would say, probably about another stop or so out of aperture choice before you start seeing the effects of diffraction, which will be a softening of edges. So on an FZ camera, definitely, stick to around like f8. F4 can be perfectly fine too for some good landscapes. If you're trying to do isolation with a smaller censored camera, like a point and shoot, like the bridge cameras, I highly suggest actually put more distance between you and the subject that you're trying to focus on. Use compression to your benefit there. So instead of shooting at, say, 25mm, shoot it maybe like 100mm or 50mm if you can, to still get some of that framing in the background for a landscape. You'll get a little bit more pop between your subject and the background, a little bit more of that separation, and you can still be using a relatively stop-down aperture while still getting that separation. So it's a little bit of just playing around. It's not always going to be the best situation to be able to stop down like that, but yeah, it's always a little tough. The other question that was there, where was it? Okay, the other question, this question was from Barry. So, for in-camera shooting, what are the best settings to get black background? If you can give me a little more detail, because there's a couple things you can do as far as like flash photography to get a blacked out background, short of like actually just shooting on a black background. Flash photography is a whole nother topic on its own, and if you guys actually want to see or hear a topic specifically on flash photography, we can do that. Might not be for another month or so, because I am going to be moving this particular set to a different area, so I'll actually be able to show more flash photography and actual video examples in the future, so we'll have to move that one down the line. Let's see, what other questions did we have before we go there? Oh, the other reason why I was looking at this one too, so that it also relates to some of the video shooters out there. If you're looking for an ultra compact camera that still has things like 10-bit video, that has the ability to have built-in ND filters, that also still does HDMI out, that has Vlog-L that's mapped for the sensor. The 2500, our FZ2500, is the one that in our lineup adds all of those features to it with a relatively big viewfinder. You still have that flip screen. You have that HDMI out. So it gives you a whole lot of the flexibilities. Think of this as kind of like a GH4, GH5 era in overall capabilities, with all the bells and whistles that a video user would love, but also with a stills shooter would love. Yeah. Let's see what other point did we get here? Okay, correct. Okay, Barry. Correct. For in-camera shooting of flowers, what are the best settings for getting a black background? Okay. So for situations like that, you're going to want to do whatever you can to overpower the lighting that's happening behind the scene. So with that, ideally you'd want to be using flash, because you're going to be able to freeze the flower, like freeze any kind of motion in it. You're also going to be able to use like high-speed sync in some cases, or you're going to be able to stop the camera down to a deep enough depth of field at a low enough ISO and use the power control on your flash to only illuminate just what's in front of it. When you start working with that, especially if you don't have the ability to like change the background, you'll start to be able to just totally dump out the background with that exposure. You can also do this. One of the things that I used to do when I was playing around with photographing, like just nature, doing some macro photography, is even something as simple as if you're doing this out in the field, you can get like collapsible little like black gobos that you could easily, in a lot of cases, be able to like prop up behind a flower on site. Obviously, as long as you're not destroying anything, that kind of thing. Some of those can help, do the separation if you're not 100% on using the flash for it. But I would highly advise working with something like flash work to get that bigger separation and faster shutter speed, lower ISO, and then use the flash power to control how much of the foreground is what's sharp for you. Also, if you can control and lower the background lighting as much as possible, so even if you're outdoors in a big bright day, have something that you can put shade over the subject that you're going on so that you can also dump the ambient light levels. That also kind of helps balance that kind of shooting out. Let's see here. What are the questions we got here? I want my S5 have B-RAW. I hear you, but B-RAW is for the S1H. S1H is a capable camera for it at the time being, so... But keep providing feedback like that. We don't have control over that stuff. We don't know if there's any hardware differences between them that allow it, but as long as you guys keep feeding information back, we cannot guarantee anything, but we will always feed that information back to our teams. Let's see here. Is there any reason why there's no luminance spot meter on the S1 update? If not, it would be great to get it in the future. I don't know why the S1, why there's no luminance spot meter. I don't have my S1 here to double check on it. But I can double check on that. When we're done with the stream, I'll leave the chat running for a few minutes, and then I'll grab my S1 and double check and see some stuff there. But yeah, I can get you some more info. I'm using my G9 as a webcam using the Lumix software, but I'm not certain if the camera itself should be in a certain mode or setting to get the best out of it. So with the G9, if you're using the actual webcam software, so the drivers that we released that allow it to function over USB, typically you're going to want to make sure that the camera's in the actual video mode. So that is the mode that has the little camcorder with an M on it. That will make sure that it's in 16:9, so you're previewing the image properly. You set yourself in, either 1080. Since over USB, you're going to be doing basically a 720p video stream anyway, as a webcam. I typically put my cameras in 1080 60 frames per second, and that typically works some of the best for it. Yeah, that's probably where I'd start. And then on the G9, I would either make sure that you're using a profile like natural, or I forget if the G9 has like 709. If the G9 has like 709 as the color profile, select that. That's what I use on my BGH1 because it's going to fit for things like YouTube and Zoom and all those other platforms, and you're not all of a sudden going to have the image show up and then everything, like all the black areas, just get crushed down. If I was shooting in standard, my shirt would just blend perfectly into the background on my chair. Redbit, thanks. Okay, you're welcome for the reply, Redbit. For BGH1s, you can find batteries online stores. You can also power it 12-volt regulated battery. Yeah. So as far as the BGH1, yeah, there's a ton of different options that you have for power and solution. As far as the battery goes, there's the Panasonic VB series batteries that we sell. There's also some good options from Core SWX that also have a D-tap on the back. So you can plug it into the camera and then also power something like this, as long as you have the correct cables. The important thing whenever you're doing stuff like that is just make sure you have the right cables. Otherwise, as far as the DC barrel jack, it'll be the similar one that's used on like the EVA 1 and some of our cameras like that. Let's see, Sean, I was just looking up the FZ2500 20 minutes ago. I live streamed with an S1 and S5 and want to add an all-in-one camera to match. I like the BGH1, but I don't want two different lens systems. Yeah, that's actually a really good kind of useful point for this. The only thing that I'd say as far as using like this particular camera for live streaming, you do have to use the HDMI out on it. So it doesn't have the USB control. And let me know if, okay. YouTube just kind of freaked out and said I wasn't sending any data to YouTube. So if something happens, just let me know. You want to use the HDMI output for that, so a capture card. And then when you're doing that, you can use something like the Lumix, I think this one is still the image app, that would allow you to actually control the camera. So you can control zoom and stuff like that through the app. So that you can still actually work with the camera, zoom when you need it. Let's see here. Other question, will Lumix Sync work with the S1 when shooting log? Will S1 be able to output Cinema 4K by HDMI? So yes, Lumix Sync does work when the camera is shooting in log. And it does output Cinema 4K after the update, so you will be able to send it out to a Ninja 5 recorder and record it there. In fact, the raw over HDMI 4K signal is a 17:9 aspect ratio because we do pixel, like pixel to pixel raw. We're not binning, we're not skipping anything for that, so you're going to get a better quality out of it. So yeah, it should work both way there. Oh, and then clarified when you're using it in raw. It does work. I have pointed out a little bit of a hitch when you have the phone connected. You can connect, trigger, and work with the camera while it's sending out RAW to a recorder. But one thing that I have brought up to some people, and actually a person in the community brought this up to my attention, the menu option for what resolutions, there's a little bit of a display issue. It's not presenting the exact correct ones, but you can use it for monitoring. It does look like log, and it's got a little bit of solarization because you're sending a raw file out that's in log, but that's just on the phone. The files look perfectly fine, but it is possible. It does work. Let's see here. Unfortunately, I don't have answers about the future of autofocus in Micro Four Thirds. If I had more updates, I would happily share them, but unfortunately, I don't. Photo Plus official. All right, so our friends over at Photo Plus are with us. Do I have to buy separate memberships for each camera? And I assume that's for the Lumix Pro Services. No. Once you register on Lumix Pro Services and you go for Red or Platinum, whatever level you want to go to, you just add your cameras. There is in Platinum, there is a kind of barrier. You have to have a certain number of cameras. And then that lets that's what qualifies you in, but I know that those numbers have drastically been dropped down on a promotion that we're running right now. So if you are interested into it, definitely take a look at lumix-pro.us. If you're in the United States, that'll bring you right to the page, and that'll give you all the information on how to get it registered. I also have, you can take a look at the QR code here, so you can just grab a shot of the QR code during this, and then you can get yourself registered. Let's see here. Do I have to buy? Okay, that was the same question. Stoked for the 6th. The S1 just gets better and better. Yes, it does. And Jeffrey says, I know you probably don't know this, but when using Panasonic S1 in 6K open gate mode, will I be able to monitor it on an external 4K monitor? I know the S1H had issues with this at launch. I will double check on that. I think, so when you have 6K, well, I'll grab my S1 in a moment and actually take a look at that and kind of get you guys an answer for how that's going to work, because I do have a monitor here. And then Walking on the Street says, there was an interview from Panasonic yesterday and mentioned about AF improvements found it on DP Review. Yes, our director, Yamane-san, had an interview over at DP Review. And did provide some info there. So I encourage you guys to go take a look and read the interview that was over there. Will Lumix Pro service come to India? By the way, thank you for answering my last question. I'm not sure. You'd have to check with local Panasonic branch in that region. I know that it is expanding. I just don't have details on when other stuff is coming out. Any plans for an L mount to Micro Four Thirds intelligent adapter? Autofocus the lenses from the S1H can be used on a BGH1. Not that I know of. I still don't know if it's possible. That's a little bit outside of my realm of understanding. But definitely keep checking. Let us know that that's something that you'd want to see, and we pass that information up to our team. Okay. So, you guys have a lot of questions today. This is awesome. I love seeing that. So what I'm going to do here is, because actually someone just brought this up before, about working with the Lumix cameras. If you've ever gone into a situation where you have the camera slung over your shoulder, you have your shutter speed set when you're doing video or photography, and you don't want that changing at all. If you work in aperture priority or shutter priority, the rear dial will change these settings for you. But one of the things that a lot of people don't know that our cameras do is, and I have to make sure I go to the correct camera to show you guys this, is when you're looking at the menu on the camera, I can go into the custom settings here, and then there's an option here called Operation Lock Setup. What this does is let you go into this and say, do you want, what of the options do you want to have locked when you turn this feature on? So you can lock out the cursor, the joystick, the touchscreen, the dials, the display button, and you can pick which one you want. And this is going to be on a vast majority of the cameras from, I believe, the GH5 and newer have this for the most part. And if you're someone who's always running into situations where you bump the dials, or you end up having situations where you go back to the camera and the shutter speed has changed or the shutter angle has changed on you, you would want to set this to lock the dial, and then obviously lock anything else that you want locked. But the second step of this is you're going to go back one page and go into the function button menu, go into the record menu, and then you're going to program one of your function buttons. Not all of them have the capability to do this on every camera, and the S series I'm going to show you is actually a little different. The S1 and the S1R and the S1 and S1R are different. I program my front button here on the camera to this icon here, which you see is Operation Lock. So now what it means is while I'm using this camera, if I push that button on the front, you'll see it says Operation Unlocked. I can roll the rear dial. I can change my shutter angle. If I push that button again, now it's locked and it won't change on me. So neither the front or back button dial will actually change anything on the shutter speed. If I want to go back and be able to change something, just push the button again, and then now I have control again. I can set it, lock it again. So where this differs on the S1 and S1R, if you're using one of those cameras, is that on the front of the camera, there's a switch here that was added in for these cameras. So you have mode 1 and mode 2 on this switch. The way you set it in this particular camera is, I have to change this out. So the way you set it on this one is, if I go in and we take a look, so we're looking at my S1R right now, is I'm going to go into the menu, and I'm going to go back to that cog page, Operation 1, so that's page 1 of the Operations menu, and then you're going to see FN lever setting. So what I can do here is I can change this to everything from silent mode, image stabilizer, a couple different mode options that you have here, or I can set this to front, rear, and control dial lock. When I set it there, I flip the switch, and then now my command dials are locked. If I change it again, now I have control if I actually put the camera into a mode that I can control because I have the lens and aperture priority. So now I'm controlling aperture. You'll see now I'm changing my aperture here. If I flip that switch, now it's locked and nothing's changing. So hopefully that answers that particular question for some people. That should cover up what you guys need on the lock settings at least. Let's see, what other questions did we have here? Is the S5 worth the extra over a G9? It's going to depend on your particular style of shooting. If you are a diehard Micro Four Thirds user, if you've got a ton of lenses invested into the system, if that's what you've worked with for a while, the G9 is a great camera. If you're someone who runs into situations where you want better low light performance, you want that full frame depth of field capabilities, then the S5 can be an amazing option for you. It's very similar in size, physically, body-wise, to the G9, but you have the full frame lenses and options available from the L mount. So everything from like our 85mm that I have here on my S5, which would go great compared to like the Nocticron. Then you have some options from like Sigma. This is their 24-14, but this is the converted one to L mount. Even stuff like this lens. This is a third-party, just totally simple, ultra-wide 11mm lens for it as well. So there's still a ton of options available for the L mount if you like going across multiple different lenses. Okay. Let's go to the other topic here. So we did locking control dials. One of the other things that actually we get asked a lot about is where do I actually update my camera for the firmware that's coming out? So if you're looking to update the firmware or you want to see if your camera needs a firmware update, I just dropped a link in the chat, which is the global site for all of our firmware downloads. Just look on the top. You'll see full frame cameras. Then you'll also see, let's see here. It's a full frame camera, Micro Four Thirds, compact cameras, a bunch of different options there for your system. Just look in there and it'll tell you if it's got a new firmware update for it. The instructions are on the site, but also we can give you guys more information about that if you need to as well. FC is asking, I understand that shooting RAW allows highlight and shadow in post, but is it possible to adjust highlight and shadow in camera in addition to aperture, shutter, and ISO? Are you talking about photography related or videography related, like cinema related? In photography, RAW files are RAW files. Any adjustments that you make in camera are not hard-coded into that file. Even stuff like, I'm actually going to jump over to my Lightroom catalog here in a second and show you guys this particular point. I can actually do that. Now. So we're actually going to jump over and we're going to look at my, it'll help if I set it up right. There we go. So we're looking at my Lightroom catalog here. This was shot with the 70-300 in my S5. And one of the things that you'll notice with one of the things you'll notice with the kind of image quality is that you'll take a raw file, you'll put it into Lightroom or most editing software, and this profile will say Adobe. It'll say usually Adobe Standard, which I will just set this to show you. So it'll come in as Adobe Standard, and sometimes it'll just look like kind of bleh. I want to skip post-processing to reduce time spent in post. Yeah. So that's actually one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this here. Is so like if you're using batch editing, Lightroom or something like that, you'll see that like most of the time ACR defaults to Adobe Standard. They've added the ability now in, I believe, the Settings tab or under Preferences for how to handle a file when it actually comes in. So where is it in mine? There's an option in here to change what the color profile is right here. So raw defaults. So if you're shooting raw stills and you want to kind of globally be able to make this much easier, go into this preference setting and change this to camera settings and then hit OK. What that means is when it comes in, it's going to, one, apply the color profile that you were using in camera. So in my case, it would be camera standard. So you're going to have the first step there. Then the other thing that you can do is just create an action. So like some of the basic things that you typically do to a photo, like if you know that you like a little bit more contrasty of a punch to an image, like I have this image edited here. So say I wanted to have this image set up how I like it. You can typically save that out as a XML file and then have it set so that on import, it applies this preset to all of your files that you import. Get you pretty close to not having to spend a ton of time in post. At that point, it's just spot checking and maybe making some slight adjustments to an image. But that's one of the cool things that at least some of these different softwares offer you. Now, the reason I wanted to bring up Lightroom at first here was that, you know, if you look at right here, like I said, it's going to choose Adobe's standard by default, but you do have the option of the Panasonic Lumix color profile selected here. So I can do L monochrome D, I can do standard monochrome, all the way into Cine D and Cine V if I really wanted to on this setup. But if I go to a program like Capture One, and I start looking at this image here, it's the same image. It's ISO 100, f8, 300mm on the 70-300. You'll notice that like you don't actually have that kind of control here. So if I go to profile, it's the manufacturer's profile for lens. If I go to color, you go in here, it's in this case, it's the S5. You can do the Pro Standard, and it's their particular processing for it. So it doesn't have the ability to just select the actual Panasonic color profiles that we have created in camera. But one thing you can notice between these two, and that's Premiere, is if I go back here, set this to standard so that they're the closest, you'll see like this image, and this isn't going to translate well on YouTube, but you'll see that there is a bit of a processing difference between how Adobe Camera Raw handles the Lumix files, and this is true for pretty much every brand. Adobe handles them pretty well, and it's how I've been used to working with files. But if I take a look at my Capture One file, again, same image, ISO 100, 1/6 of a second, f8, a little bit of adjustments being done to both of these images. You'll see that Capture One is producing maybe a little bit of a sharper image than the other. So I would definitely say, you know, take a look at the different programs, see which one, you know, really works best for you. Know that as far as the S5 goes, it is in support with Capture One. Neither program has the tethering functionality direct into it, but as I mentioned earlier, if for both Adobe and for Capture One, if tethering is something you want to see direct into those programs, know that a lot of us here, myself, Matt Frazier, some of the other team members here, we all agree. I would love to see a lot of our cameras in those programs for direct tethering, but you guys letting, like the community letting those companies know that you want to see support there would definitely also help the cause of getting that kind of thing done. Let's see here. Mark Richardson, the BGH1, a Micro Four Thirds camera, have RAW support. Is it possible to get RAW support for a GH5, or is that an Atomos thing? No, I don't think it would. You could say it was an Atomos thing. There's a lot more involved with doing RAW over HDMI than just flipping a switch. There's a lot that has to be brought in onto whether or not the hardware is capable for it. One of the things you have to remember is that when the GH5 and even the GH5S came out, RAW over HDMI was not a thing that we were thinking about. So I don't know, and actually I can confirm that a lot of people don't know whether or not the hardware in a GH5 or GH5S can do RAW over HDMI. But know that a lot of us have pushed and requested and brought your requests up to the team. So I'm just not sure. I wouldn't imagine that it would be able to do it just because of when that camera was produced, when it first went into production, what was available to be done, and what parts were out at that time as far as, HDMI connectors and how the image is being processed and components that may need to be on the board to enable it. So unfortunately, I'm just not sure, but I would lean more on the point that it probably wouldn't, just because of when it was created. Similar to a lot of the other cameras too. Cameras from that era, it just wasn't a point of something that anyone was thinking about. FC, especially when shooting photo or video with a person standing in front of a bright window, bringing up shadows in camera will help tremendously so I can retake photo and video, videos for mistake. Yeah, it having a more normalized editing process is always kind of like that I forget what the phrase is, but it's like that is like the ultimate target, is if you were able to just click one button and have all the editing done. For particular situations like that, there's a couple things I do specifically. Our cameras, and actually let me connect my S5 again here, and I'll show you this. As again, I'm talking away from the microphone. I apologize, everybody. So one of the things that I actually do with my S-series cameras, that actually I don't know if a lot of people know that you can do this, is I can go in here, and I have to remember exactly where it is, because again, a lot of times, even though I work with these cameras daily, I'll set something once and then I usually don't have to go back into it until someone asks me. I'm just gonna say it. I know nothing about any GH6 or anything like that. Unfortunately, guys, I don't know. I wish I knew, but I don't. So when it comes to working in situations where you know that you may always want to be running into situations where backlighting is usually where you work, and you'd rather kind of lift the exposure a little bit, or you notice that the camera in that scenario is always underexposing an image for your particular taste, we have the exposure offset adjustment in the S-series cameras that when you go into here, I can say center weighted metering, which is what I primarily have my camera set to. I can go into this and say, well, I personally always like to shoot a little under with my particular cameras. And that's mainly because I personally feel that we meter maybe a little hot by about a third of a stop for my personal taste in shooting. So I can come into here and I can say, I want my 0 point now to be 1/3 underexposed. So what that means is that I can now, when I have my camera set for center weighted metering, my exposure, the 0 point on my exposure is now offsetting to 1/3 underexposed. You can even do this to the plus side. So you can go in and say, I want my center weighted metering to actually be giving me 1 stop over. You want to be careful with doing this, just because if you're filming, if you're someone who does ETTR for filming, you want to be careful that you don't just put this up to +1 and then forget that you put it at +1 and then start exposing your footage at +2, because then you're actually doing it at +3. The camera does set it so that 0 is now that +1, so you'd only have to go up +1 if you're a 2-stop overexposing kind of shooter. So a little bit of little things to just take a look at there, but some of those things can hopefully, speed up your process there. Photo is saying, yes, I've emailed phase one as soon as I got the camera. Yeah, so like that's the kind of stuff that basically they got to hear a demand for it, and hopefully it will. Obviously, no guarantees, but it all helps get stuff like that forward. Let's see here. Any other questions before I go to the last point here? Let's see, what other questions we have? Oh, constant preview is one of the things that we had a lot of questions about. Let me cover that quickly. Some of this may be a little redundant for some of you that are joining us, but this is a point that we get asked a lot of questions about, is the constant preview. Actually, you know what? I'm going to address this question first. Jeremy's asking, why aren't there any lens correction profiles for Lumps lenses in Lightroom? I think you mean Lumix lenses. I'm going to let that one slide. It's a joke. So let's go back to my... Is it Philip? I answer questions that you tag at Lumix cameras from in front of the question so I can see it. Otherwise, it's just a wall of text. If I haven't answered your question, it's because of that. So type the @ Lumix cameras. You'll see it'll pop up to tag us in it. Put that in front of your question, and it pops up on my screen so I can see it. I promise you I am not purposely avoiding questions. If you ask people who've regularly been here, I for the most part, I don't ignore questions, especially if I have someone else here that can help answer questions there. I did mean Lumix, yeah. Okay, so why aren't there any lens profiles in Lumix lenses in Lightroom? So that's actually something that I want to show here. So let me go into my screen here. So, and actually let me move my camera. Oh, I have to do it this way. Okay. So one of the things that you'll see here in Lightroom, so this is the most current update that they have. And I apologize that I'm looking up. That's just where my monitor is. In here, it used to show when you would click down here on the into the photos setup, where it basically says for lens corrections, there'd be a button here that you could click that it would say internal profile is being applied, because the Lumix, the S series and the G series, the lens optic correction profiles are embedded in the file as information. So when it gets into things like Lightroom, Capture One, some other programs, it has that information and it applies it automatically. You can see this in some of the kind of open source raw editing programs that you can strip all information away from all cameras and lenses and look at just pure raw data. But in a lot of cases, those cause so many other problems because they're guessing at how to actually work with the raw files. A lot of times it's based on an older raw processing version, and it's just adding a name to it so that it recognizes it. But basically what you'll see here is that they've updated the tab now in Lightroom so that this, again, the 70-300, you'll see that the make is Panasonic, the model is 70-300, and then this is the camera settings. So it's automatically done by the camera. There's no need to go in and add a profile to it. Now, does that mean that you can't profile your lenses yourself? Of course not. You can always profile your lenses yourself and adjust distortion or adjust anything like this. Like, you still have control to shift an image to your particular liking. Just know that those profiles are already built and profiled by the camera, so you don't have to do that stuff as often. It's usually just a lot easier because the camera handles it for you. Let's see, what other questions? Marco asks, do you suggest to shoot video always in Vlog with the S1 or eventually in Cinelike 2, for example? I'm a firm believer that you kind of probably need to understand that Vlog is not a magic bullet for your filming. There's probably going to be scenarios where you're going to be working and creating an image, and shooting in Vlog is just not the ideal solution for you. Shooting something like natural or Cine D or Cine V could definitely be a much better solution for you. You have to know that Vlog will always require color grading, obviously, but also log profiles typically, if you underexpose them, are going to increase a lot more noise than a standard color profile. And I say a lot more, and it's not really like a lot more. It's just that know that shooting with a log profile will have higher noise than shooting with a standard Rec. 709 profile. That noise gets cleared up as you start to grade it and work on it, and you can always apply things like neat noise to get rid of it, or whatever your noise reduction software is. And you do get more dynamic range out of a Vlog profile because it allows you to be able to set it out as like Rec. 2020 for HDR grading. But I would take a look. It depends on how much time you want to spend in post. Like we were just talking before with photo there. How much time do you want to spend on a piece of content in post versus how much time do you want to spend just creating the content, shooting it, and turning it and getting it to a client or to your social media or whatever your goal is for that project. Griffin Hammond, one of our earlier ambassadors with the GH series too, there were a number of conversations that I had with him way back, when we were launching the GH5 about how natural is an awesome profile to use for things like broadcast and where you need to be able to capture and send footage very quickly. Nail exposure, you get it right. It has nice fall off. It has a good dynamic range that fits on a Rec. 709 output. And you don't really have to worry too much about color correcting in post. So I definitely don't suggest always shooting in Vlog. Play around with the profiles, look at the job that you're doing, and see what fits best for your particular shoot. And to that point, if you are a stills photographer, and I reiterate, a stills photographer, or you're a videographer and you're shooting with stills on your S-Series camera that has Vlog, do not shoot Vlog in stills raw files. There is zero benefit to doing it. A regular raw file from a stills camera, like the S1, S1R, S1H, S5, a regular RW2 raw file will have more dynamic range than a video format will. You're talking a 14-bit raw file that is full ISO, white balance, exposure, all that kind of control because it's a still photograph, versus a video file that is in ProRes RAW or in BRAW on an S1H, which would be 12-bit, or 10-bit internally in cameras. So you just want to kind of play around with that kind of stuff there. Jack Ryan asks, where can I find JPEG picture profiles in Lightroom from straight out of camera on G9? If they're JPEGs, you don't have the ability to change the profile after because it's baked into the image. Now, I do want to answer Philip's question. Thank you, Philip, for throwing the Lumix in front of it, because now I can see it on my end here. So the question was, is it possible to lock the shutter when changing out lenses to help with dust in the field? Not much love this time around for the S5 firmware. Anything in the pipeline for the S5? So there is a lot to, I'd say, take into account when you look at having a camera that can close the shutter when you take a lens off. In some cases, I can see definitely, it makes a lot of sense. You can slightly protect the sensor. You have the shutter closed. It's an interesting concept. The downside of it is that now you have the very fragile blades exposed. So the trade-off is dust on a sensor, or light dust, the chance of a dust on a sensor, versus, which is cleanable relatively easily, versus having something where you have the shutter blades exposed and that same dust particle drops down in, and if it's big enough, when the shutter closes, it could damage the shutter. The industry as a whole, I think, is out on whether or not this is a good trend or a bad trend in the long run. I would say we would have to see what's going to happen with cameras that do implement it over time and over like actual use. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we have plans to do it now, just because there's a little too much of a risk there for bigger damage happening than just dust. The second part of the question was not much love, or second part of the comment was not much love for the S5 firmware update this time around. Anything in the pipeline for the S5? I don't have any information on future firmware updates other than what we've announced. But one of the things to remember, when you look at the full stack of cameras that we have, the S5 got a very solid upgrade very quickly out of the gate from it being launched. I believe we launched in August or September, and the firmware update was in November, I believe, for the camera. I could be slightly off on the dates there. So that got a massive update already. This go around, the massive update is the S1, really. That camera gets a huge update. And then, the S1H got the B-RAW update for work with the video assists, and the BGH1 got its RAW over HDMI update as well. Not every update is always going to be massive for every single camera. It's always going to be there's always going to be a flow with it. I know some people are disappointed, like S1R shooters. I love shooting my S1R. I know there's disappointment that there's not a bigger update for the S1R, but you also have to remember that the S1R just got 5K recording and 10-bit in the last update. So things are just, things update in cycles. Barry's saying, settings to get bokeh in portrait shots with an FZ1000 Mark II. You want to use the kind of settings that I was talking about before. As far as pushing to get more bokeh on a 1-inch camera, move as far away as you can, zoom as far in as you can, and still not have much distortion, so up to where your level is. Create that distance and use lens compression to give you more bokeh. You can then shoot and say f4 or f8 at say like 50 millimeter versus f8 at 135 or 200 millimeter. At 135 or 200 millimeter, that background is going to be way more blown out and kind of smoothed out with bokeh than it would be at 50 millimeter. So it can help you kind of balance that out. And then if you're a flash photographer for portraits, know that the FZ1000 Mark II has a hot shoe on it, so you can use wireless flashes, have one set up by your subject, and then just back away and trigger it remotely. That should be like the biggest help for doing that. What are the questions? How much influence do Lumix ambassadors have on future products, features, and feedback? Our ambassadors provide us tons of information. Not just from their own personal uses, but from doing things like I do with monitoring the forums, monitoring chat, listening to all the comments that you guys provide, and working with everybody. So they're not they don't work for Panasonic. They are sponsored by Panasonic or by Lumix, but they provide us feedback and comments all the time. Knockstrom's asking for Netflix requirements. For Netflix, the requirement is to have master files in Vlog or Vlog L. The way I do is to load a LUT and external recorder display, but keep the original Vlog L, keeping an eye on noise. I think that may have been a follow-up. I apologize if I seem a little spaced on that's a continuation of a comment there. Will the S5 get firmware updates like the S1 to support 6K? Unfortunately, I do not have comments on whether or not cameras will get future firmware updates. Sorry. Alejandras, we S1 owners are super happy with the April 6th update. Only Panasonic does that. To my opinion, the S1 is the best deal. Awesome. Well, hey, we're glad you guys like the update. It'll be fun on the 6th when it actually releases. But please, a new firmware with 124K... Updates are fun, but there's no information that we have on future products. Believe me, a lot of us would love to see 124K, 8K, all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, we just don't have info on that stuff. Cam35 says, since BGH1 has 13 stops of dynamic range and uses the same sensors as the GH5S, when can the GH5S get 13 stops of dynamic range instead of the 12 dynamic range it has now? There are differences in processing and overall capabilities of the cameras. I do not know if the GH5S actually has the identical sensor, has the same processing capabilities. There's a reason why both cameras are designed differently, and there's a reason why the BGH1 has a fan cooling system in it. Temperature and thermals can actually cause hits to image quality. So I'm truthfully not sure if the GH5S has the ability to hit 13 stops of dynamic range as far as the chart goes like that. Independent testing will always be a little different. Some people will say that it has more. Some people say that it has less. You have to look at the charts to determine what in the real world the numbers are. Let's see here. I'm going to take one more question, and then we are actually going to have to call it for today because I didn't realize that we're at 11 after already. I apologize for running so long today, guys. Lux says, how to use more than one camera with the image app? Unfortunately, it's not possible. The image app is a single connection base, so it only works one camera to one app. I have brought that up to our team before. I would love to see an app that controls multiple cameras. It would be awesome. Last question, actually. Okay, because this one is actually, I think, a question. We addressed this during the Lumix Expo the last 2 days. Will you ever get the option to switch off the center tick box when using manual focus lenses? So I assume you're referencing this box. That box. Matt Frazier and I have pushed this a lot. We would love to see that as well. I can tell you the current challenge with it is that, truthfully, that box shows you where your manual focus punch-in is going to be. Without it, you have to remember where it is. So, and hear me out on this. I know this is not an answer a lot of people are going to want to hear, but there is a balance between saying just turning it off versus having it there because there's the reference to say, here's where your focus point's going to be when you punch in for manual focus. When it's off, you have no idea where that point was as you're shooting. But we do push, and I know Matt and I have pushed hard to say, like, at least allow an option if possible. And I know that they've heard these. We just don't have answer or feedback for you guys yet. Wish I had an answer for you, but again, that's why we do these streams. It helps us get this information up to our team so that they can at least try to get us some answers and hear what all of your guys' feedback is. Any other last questions here? No, it actually looks like we got some pretty good questions covered. So I want to thank you everyone for spending so much time with me today. I'm going to drop the email address down into the chat, which is lumixlive@us.panasonic.com. We use that as a platform to help determine what future events we're going to run when we do the AMA streams, when we have community streams like this, where it's kind of addressing the questions that you guys have all had. Feel free to drop us a line there. Let us know what you want to see in future events. It helps us out tremendously. If you guys liked this video, if you guys liked the content that we gave you, please think about giving us a like and considering giving us a subscription. I can tell you, as you've probably, if you're someone who's consumed a lot of content on YouTube over the last year, you know that there are these kind of waves in the YouTube community where all of a sudden people start saying, I know there's a number of people watching today, and of the people that do watch, only about 40% of you subscribe to the channel. It would be awesome if the other, 60% of you actually 60, yeah, 60% of you would actually subscribe to the channel. It helps us out tremendously if you liked this content. It helps us continue to bring this stuff out to you guys every week. And definitely let us know at Lumix Live at us.panasonic.com what you want to see in future events. Don't forget the Lumix Pro Services system is out there. You can use the QR code, check it out to get your cameras registered. And remember that we're back every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to have the link up ready to go for next week's session. I'm just working out a couple more details before we get that up. And also know that all of these videos are recorded and stored right here on YouTube under the Lumix Live playlist. So if you want to go back and take a look at an older video of something that we talked about, go back, take a look at it. Let us know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you all next week. Thanks for joining me. It'd help if I hit the button at the right time, wouldn't it? Bye.